Well, good afternoon and welcome to NYU in DC. I bet some of you didn't know NYU had a presence here in DC, right?
We did.
Oh, you did. Okay. All right. All right. Well, please, another welcome for Pat Metheny.
Thank you.
And Pat is here as part of the DC Jazz Festival, which began on June 9th, and hopefully you've picked up one of our brochures. We have a lot of activities coming up this week. We are a citywide event, and we have a major weekend coming up at Yards Park to culminate the festival Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So please, we look forward to seeing you somewhere, because you know, as a citywide festival, we're in all four quadrants of the city, and we're in 21 neighborhoods, so we're likely in your own neighborhood with some of our programming. And a lot of it is free, so please join us. And for tonight, a very special concert at the Kennedy Center at 7:30. It's an evening with this gentleman's latest band. Pat, tell us about this new band you got.
It's a little different this time, actually. You know, I've kind of followed the operating procedure that is, you know, that thing where you write a bunch of music, you make a record, and you do a tour. And I've been, you know, doing that pretty much every year for 40-some years now. And there's this, you know, bulk of music now that has accumulated, a lot of which I don't play that much. And I thought it would be fun and interesting to play a lot of the old tunes, sort of through the prism of, you know, some newer musicians to me. And so I had Antonio signed up, Antonio Sanchez, who's been playing with me in just about every situation for many years. And for about 10 years now, there's been a piano player in England who, you know, he had mentioned that I had been an influence, you know, since he started making records, and I heard something that he had done, and I thought sounded really good. And then on one of my last tours in the UK, I stuck around, and we were going to play for an hour, and we ended up playing for like 6 hours. And this guy's name is Willem Simcock. He's a really, really good piano player. So I thought, well, this guy would be good for what I'm thinking of. And so then I had those guys, and I thought, okay, this would be a great chance to check out bass players. And you know, there's so many talented new musicians around, and so I really kind of made it a point to go out and hear a lot of people, and then got together with a bunch of the people that I thought would be good candidates. And the person that really just instantly rose to the top of the list is Linda Mahon-O, who has been around for a while. She's been doing a lot of stuff around New York for a few years. She's a little bit like Willem. I mean, you know, it's interesting as time has gone on. I mean, there's a generation or two now of people where, you know, various records of mine were important to them in their early going. Linda is another one like that. You know, she talks about Question and Answer a lot and Bright Size Life. You know, I mean, I've been lucky to play with a lot of great bass players. So, you know, from a bass perspective, there are a few of those, especially those trio records that have kind of a little place in the stuff that younger musicians would be checking out, and in Linda's case, that was a thing. So she knew a lot of the tunes too. So that's kind of the band. And then, you know, over this past year, we've been playing all over the world, and you know, we've probably got about 60 or so of my older tunes kind of in the book. And you know, it's interesting because last year I did a bunch of duet concerts with Ron Carter, which was great. And I've always loved Ron, and we had a great time playing together. And of course, we had a number of car rides together where I got to ask him every question I ever wanted to ask about the Miles Quintet and all those Wes Montgomery records. He's on like 3/4 of my favorite records of all time. And one thing that he said that really stuck with me, he said, you know, with the Miles Band, we played the same set for 7 years, of course, which we all know, you know, and we know the set. And even when we recorded those records, we never played those tunes. And he said that's what Miles wanted, because he wanted us to get the code together so that then when we went in the studio, we could apply that to the new music. And that's a little bit what I've been strategizing with this band. And in fact, in December, we went into the studio after we'd probably played about 80 gigs at that point. And we made a new record. I'd written 14 new tunes that had nothing to do with what we've been playing live. And it sort of, I think, has worked out that way. We were able to take all of those experiences that we've gathered from playing, you know, all those various older tunes and apply them to this whole new thing. And honestly, I haven't had a chance to put the record together yet. I mean, we've been working pretty much ever since December, but when this little round of gigs is over, I'm gonna get in there and get under the hood with that stuff. But I'm excited about it. It's a really good band. It's a fun band.
So what's happening now on stage is playing your repertoire, long-term repertoire from over the years, playing it in the manner of this particular quartet. Of course, it's going to be different. But then when you put out a record by this quartet, it will be something entirely different.
Yeah, it's cool.
Well, you know, a lot of your music, you know, and I'm sensitive to this because I'm from Ohio, but a lot of your music reflects your Midwest upbringing. Talk about that whole sensibility that comes to your music.
Well, you know, it's an interesting thing for me. I've always felt like the musicians that I have admired the most, and this transcends any sense of style or genre or any of that stuff, are musicians who are able to sort of represent in an honest way who they are. Mm-hmm. And there's a certain kind of, I think, authenticity that this form mandates. And it's very demanding, I think, that that honesty be there. Mm-hmm. And that, for me, was something that I recognized early on, that when I thought about my favorite musicians, every one of them was representing something that was very personal to them, mm-hmm. and that was unique to who they were and the way that they saw the world and the way they heard things. And so for me, yeah, I grew up in a little town in Missouri. I didn't grow up in, you know, D.C. or mm-hmm. anything like that. And you know, my early experiences were, in musical terms, had as much to do with like open major chords as they did with like dissonant harmony. Mm-hmm. And I've always felt very comfortable with that. And at the same time, as I, you know, had the experience around Kansas City, where I did have an incredible, just unbelievable luck to be around this amazing scene in the early 70s, where I was able to work with great musicians in that community. As much as I did enjoy playing in that tradition, I also really thought, well, you know, I also like playing like a G chord, you know. Mm-hmm. To me, these, and I understood early on that these didn't necessarily, for me, need to be mutually exclusive items. Not only that, there was a way that I was feeling that I wanted to improvise that was difficult for me to reconcile with a lot of the forms and structures and harmonies of the existing material. Mm-hmm. And, you know, so gradually I start, you know, I mean, people talk about composition and all that. I mean, my earliest compositional impulse was really to create an environment for myself to do what I hope to be able to do as an improviser. Mm-hmm. It was almost a functional thing. And that sort of revolved around, I mean, not to get too technical, the idea of, you know, there being sort of static upper structures with moving bass notes that allowed this sort of, you know, open kind of tonality to exist in tandem with the really evolved harmonic environment that I kind of chronologically, you know, came to, mm-hmm. you know, through the post-Herbie, post-everything harmonic zone. Mm-hmm. And to, you know, to me, these things actually, I found pretty early on that there was a way to do those things at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so for me, you know, that one of the cliches of cliches, and it's a really good one, is that thing of, the things that are most personal ultimately become the most universal. And I think when I look across the spectrum of musicians that I really admire, that has been a real kind of bellwether thing. It's like, if I say Joe Henderson, you get this sound. I mean, you don't even have to say Henderson. You can just say Joe, and there's a sound. If you say Wes, there's a sound. And that sound is something that's really unique to that person. It's something that you won't ever get again. And in each case, like Gary Burton's another one. I mean, that's it. It's like, we can have Gary Burton tributes from now on, but there is only going to be that one voice like that.
Well, that's the ultimate goal, is to get your own personal sound.
Well,
and how did you arrive at that?
For me, there is an interesting sort of cultural, chronological thing about that issue. I had a guy, a European jazz journalist, asked me a question a little while ago that I thought was a very interesting question. He said, "Are you the last old guy, or are you the first new guy?" You can probably dig that, right? I mean, you know exactly what, and right away I was like, wow, now that is an interesting question.
Exactly.
And having thought about it a lot, I think I probably am closer to being the last old guy.
Okay.
In the sense that, jazz education didn't exist when I started. That kind of came along a little bit later.
But you did go to the University of Miami, right?
For a week.
Okay.
But, jazz education as we know it, even having to do with that particular thing, really evolved in about 73 and 74, early 70s. That was, and by that, I mean, that's when this whole quantification of chord scales and harmony, and okay, it's a D minor, we're going to play the Dorian mode, and there's this whole language now, of which there are probably in this room a number of people who would know, like how to dissect giant steps 50 different ways using pentatonic scales and this, that, and the other thing. When I came along, basically I started playing gigs in Kansas City in 1969. There wasn't any of that. It would be a organ player who would say, "Do you know the song is you?" And I would go, "No." And he'd go, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then once I figured it out, he'd do it in another key the next day, or we'd never play it again. And I mean, I learned by watching his left hand to sort of figure out what the chords were. But there was no thing of, okay, you play these notes on that chord. It was all guys basically who had learned through this process of, being on the bandstand with musicians who were better than they were, basically. I mean, that's sort of the long-standing tradition of this music. And I mean, that's how I learned.
Well, no, you do have a relationship with Berkeley.
That was later, too. Now, this is an interesting thing that has to do exactly with this. So, when I left Kansas City, I was 17, just about to turn to 18. And this University of Miami thing you're talking about was actually probably the happiest thing the happiest day in my parents' life, because
you were going so far away?
Well, no, not that. It was more that, I mean, because I started working in Kansas City when I was 15, from 7th grade on, I never took a book home. And the fact that I even graduated from high school was like a mercy graduation. I mean,
So you had tunnel vision?
I was practicing or working on music every waking hour. And, so the thought of me going to a college, I mean, I was basically flunking out of high school. This gentleman who was the dean of the University of Miami, where, again, going back to this chronological moment, at that time, in 1972, there were really only 2 schools where they even had jazz programs, and Berkeley was one, North Texas was another.
Right.
The University of Miami had decided they were going to open up their jazz program, and they were going to include, for the first time, and this is sort of hard to even imagine now, but you could not go to college with electric guitar as a major anywhere. at that time. University of Miami decided they were going to do that. So this gentleman, Dr. Bill Lee, who was you probably knew Dr. Lee.
Right.
Will Lee's
Will
dad.
Lee's dad, yeah.
Came to Kansas City and recruited me. He came to a little organ trio gig I was doing, and I'm here to offer you a full scholarship to go to the University of Miami. And I was like, what? And, I went home.
Have you seen my grades?
I did, exactly. He said, we don't care. And I went home and I told my parents, and I thought they were going to explode with joy. It was like, like our... and now I have 3 kids myself, so I understand a lot of things about my parents now that I, of course, didn't understand then. I mean, it would be a little bit like, one of my kids coming home and saying, Dad, I've got a scholarship to play Minecraft at, at NYU, I mean, for my parents, the whole idea of what I was doing was so abstract to them that it could manifest into something that was tangible, like a scholarship, was amazing to them. So I went to the University of Miami, and the first day I was there, I met Jaco Pastorius, my very good friend for many years. And he said, hey, I got some gigs. You want to do them? And I was like, sure. And
First day?
In Miami.
No, the first day?
First day. Not to mention that the first time I heard him, I thought, because I had never been anywhere. I had never left Missouri except to go to Wisconsin once for my grandparents. So I thought, when I heard Jaco, I thought, there must be people like this everywhere. Because I had nothing to compare it to. I was like, wow, man, I really need to get it together then, So, within a very short time, I was working all the time in Miami, and I had to go to Dr. Lee and say, look, thank you for this, but, I just want to play. And because of this thing that I mentioned of, them opening up the guitar program, they expected there to be about 8 students, and there were 80. Wow. So they needed another teacher, so they hired me to teach because I had been playing so much. So I did teach there for a year after that first week, and then I met Gary Burton during that time, who then offered me the job to teach at Berkeley, which is the next thing you were talking about.
Okay.
And he kind of did that, I think, kind of to hedge, like maybe he might want to hire me, and that was a way to check out if I was ready or not. And after I'd been teaching there for a month or 2, he did hire me, and then I played in his band for 3 years, and that was, I mean, for me, joining his band was like joining the Beatles. That was my favorite band, the Gary Burton Quartet of that, late 60s, early 70s period. It was the band,
so
the dream guitar gig.
You were teaching at the same time?
I was teaching, yeah. I mean, Steve Swallow was also teaching there, and yeah, the band was kind of like almost like the artist in residence kind of band at Berkeley. Yeah.
So was that the beginning of how Berkeley became so identified with guitar students?
I think that that era that I mentioned, where suddenly, well, I mean, I'm even a kind of a specimen of this phenomenon of the guitar in our broader culture. I mean, guitar was always around, but certainly that era of, the Beatles and so forth, I think millions of people took up the guitar after that. And, I was, in the 5th grade, influenced by that. Guitar was not just an instrument, it was an almost iconic symbol of everything that was about to happen. And, where my story was very different from that is that, yes, I did see the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show, and I did get a guitar, but then a week later, my brother brought home 4 and More, the Miles record. Right. So I was like, forget that. I just want to listen to Tony Williams.
This is your brother Mike, the trumpet player?
Yeah. And, I mean, I was like, man, die-hard jazz snob all through junior high and high school. I didn't want to listen to anything except Sonny Rollins and Train and everything else, because I think if you're going to really deal with the music, you kind of must go through a period like that. And
Well, you mentioned Jocko. He was maybe the first. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but you've had a number of very fruitful affiliations with
That's for sure.
some fantastic musicians. I mean, look down the list. With Jocko, Charlie Hayden, Herbie, Michael Brecker, Jack DeJohnette, a number of others. Talk about what that has meant to you, because I mean, you have this one side where you have this distinguished career leading a band and on these lengthy tours with the Pat Metheny group generally. But then you also have this spirit of collaboration where you really seem to enjoy these opportunities to collaborate with these people like Dave Holland and others. Talk about how you balance that.
Well, balance is such an important word in general, and on every level is a constant area of importance to me. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I've been, first of all, I have to say, incredibly lucky to have the opportunity to be around great musicians, really from, you know, they're not as well known as the people you name, but the musicians that I played with around Kansas City as I was growing up were absolutely essential to everything that ever happened with me. There was a drummer there, Tommy Ruskin, who sadly is no longer on the planet, but man, Tommy was really, to this day, including Jack, including Billy Higgins, including Roy Haynes, one of the greatest drummers I've ever played with. And I got to play with him every night for years at a very important stage of development. And I kind of understood then and now. I mean, you know, whenever young guys say, give me some advice, my advice is always be around musicians who are better than you are, musicians you can learn from. And that to me has always been a very important component. I really feel like it's essential for me to be around people as much as possible that can illuminate things that are not necessarily on my sensibility of what's happening. And you know, the early going for me was a little odd because you know, I did, and kind of following up that statement, the 3 years that I spent in Gary Burton's band was also unbelievably important. I mean, I can talk about Gary for an hour, but also Steve Swallow and Bob Moses and Mick Goodrick, who were in the band at the same time. All of them had an incredibly important, you know, influence on me about many things that don't even have to do with music, just how to be, how to go on the road, how to do all that stuff. But then Gary in particular was, you know, I spent, you know, these years in Kansas City almost, you know, playing by ear and so forth. With Gary, I mean, we're going to play all these really hard Carlo Bley tunes that have like unbelievably weird changes, like Vashkar and all these tunes. And it's like, you're going to have to know how to do this thing, which ultimately ends up being this jazz education thing. You got to be able to dissect this into all of these different categories of harmony. So I did have to transfer this sort of old guy thing into the new guy thing. And through Gary, that happened. Not to mention that he was the kind of leader, like every night after the gig, I would hear for 45 minutes about, you know, why not to play an E natural on a D minor 7 flat 5 chord, you know, or whatever the topic was. And that kind of relationship, to me, fed that, you know, that thing of being around better musicians and so forth. Then I made that first record, Bright Size Life, and you know, at that moment, a lot of stuff happened. I mean, I kind of started winning polls and, you know, much faster than I ever would have anticipated. I was thrust into a position of like, you know, I'm going to be a leader. And I was 21 and 22 maybe. And so I kind of went with that in a way that was pretty hardcore in the sense that I said, okay, if I'm going to do that, I'm only going to do that. And for the first 10 years after I started my band, I didn't do anything except my own music. I thought, okay, and also we were literally on the road nonstop. in a van driving around everywhere
So
playing
when
gigs.
did you become comfortable with the whole idea of collaborating?
Well, about, I guess, not quite 10 years in, maybe a little less than that. And you wouldn't believe what I said no to. When I look back at it now, it's like, God, I could have done this and I could have done that. I mean, you know, really significant things. And I had made the commitment that I'm going to do this. Mike Brecker had never made a record of his own. And in 1987, and yeah, I started my band in 77, he said, you know, I'm going to make my first record. Would you play on it? I'm like, God, you know. I mean, and he was already a heroic, you know, iconic figure at that point. But he did have a kind of odd career in that he didn't make his own record until he was 15 years into it. Right. So that began, you know, I was like, yeah. And so, you know, he built it a little bit around the 80-81 record that we had done with Charlie and Jack. And so from that point on, I did a lot of stuff. Kenny Garrett, Roy Ham, I mean, you know, there's a long list. Josh Redman's first record and so forth. And also, along the way, in my own area, I also had, you know, a trio with Charlie Hayden and Billy Higgins, and, you know, the 80-81 band toured a lot. You know, I was always, you know, I mean, as much as people talk about the Pat Metheny group and the trio, and to me, it's all the same thing. I mean, I almost got a little bit too good, probably, at branding. Okay, this is this and this is that. For me, it's all the same thing. You know, it's all music. And so with Brecker's record, I really did start doing a lot of stuff, playing on other people's records and so forth. But that was, you know, a period that then kind of came to a close with Mike's last record, with Pilgrimage. And I kind of thought, okay, well, those are the bookends. And from then until now, it's very rare that I do stuff again. I'm really kind of focusing on my own thing. I did do one sideman thing recently that was very special for me. Logan Richardson is an incredible new musician from Kansas City. I've known him since he was a kid. He is a true artist, this cat. And he asked me to play, actually Jason.
Jason Moran's on that.
Yeah, he's on that. And it was a great band and great music, and I really wanted to do that. But other than that, mostly I'm just kind of doing my own thing again.
Well, back to the Gary Burton band. You mentioned Mick Goodrick. How was it for a young guy playing in a band with another guitar player in the band? How did you find your space there?
Yeah, two guitars is a challenging thing. Mick and I had a natural, organic connection right from the first time we played. And I think that was part of Gary's, you know, thinking, is that, you know, even without, you know, the idea of you know, because Gary's band had always been a quartet. And Mick was probably already at that point starting to think about leaving anyway, by the time I came along. But then Mick and I started to do duet gigs around Boston that became kind of a thing, you know, and we could just play, and we still can. We don't even have to call a tune. We can just start playing, and we can do this thing. And Gary came to one of those gigs, and I think he was like, you know, that, you know. But it is, you know, even me, I generally think, you know, one guitar is usually one too many. Anyway, let alone two. So yeah, getting two guitar, but on the other hand, two guitars really working together can be great. But yeah, it requires a special kind of almost, they have to be players that are thinking first as kind of orchestrators in a way. You know, it's like you really have to sort of find your registers and so forth, which Mick and I just sort of couldn't do.
And I suppose players that have a certain sound that balances off of one another.
Well, and part of that, when Gary did ask me to join the band, I actually came up with an idea, which turned out to be at that time a difficult idea, which is I thought, well, I'll just play 12-string, and then that'll be different. You know, again, this is sort of going back to the old guy, new thing. Old guy, new guy thing. Back then, they didn't have guitar tuners, you know, like the electronic things that you plug in. Trying to tune a 12-string with itself is challenging, if there's any guitar players here. trying to tune a 12-string with vibes, which is the most unforgiving tuning device. It's basically, you know, a row of tuners. I mean, I spent the whole first year in the band just trying to tune up on the 12 strings. And I had a really bad 12 string to start with too. So it was, yeah, that was, but yeah, that did differentiate the sound. So.
Well, you know, I know that you've got to get back to the Kennedy Center for your sound check, but I also know that there are some people in the audience who I'm sure are eager to ask a question. We have a gentleman, we have two people in fact, a gentleman and a young lady standing in the back with a microphone. So if you have a question, they will come to you with the microphone. Down here. We'll take you first down here, and then the gentleman in the middle with the tie, and then you third, and then you fourth, and you fifth.
So after all these years of recording and touring, do you still love it? What do you like most? Have you come to dread?
Oh, there's no dread involved at all. It's a privilege to be able to play. And every gig I play, every minute that I can be involved in music is, you know, just, I mean, I can't begin to say what an incredible, enriching experience it has been for me to live a life inside of music. And, you know, I did kind of indicate, and it's true, I was, you know, really uneducated at age 17 in terms of scholarly things. You know, I had not studied anything. And yet, through music, you know, I kind of learned about math, and I kind of learned about science and culture and history, and, you know, I mean, you know, I find out now there's even kind of a name for this, which is kind of progressive education, that you can sort of like learn through one thing about everything. And music has really been this unbelievable repository of information and insight, and every second of every gig is, to me, something, you know, that is just, it's an honor to be able to be a musician. And at the same time, yeah, I've been on the road for 43 years now, like hundreds of gigs a year often. There are challenges in that. I've kind of learned how to do it. My metabolism is sort of geared to that now, but it is not at all an easy way to go through life. And very few people are suited to it, actually. It's difficult for me to find musicians who can kind of hang with my thing in that respect. Can find guys who can play 10 gigs great, or 20 gigs, but to find somebody who's going to play great every night for 100 nights in a row, that's challenging. And be able to do it too. I mean, you know, physically and spiritually and everything else. You know, Phil Woods had the best line about this, which I've always thought was great, which is, you know, the concert, the playing, that's free. What the promoter has to pay for is to get on the bus, to get on the plane, to pack your suitcase. That's what the fee's for. The actual gig is free. And I've always thought, yeah, that's right.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Pat, big fan from the beginning. Enjoy your stuff. But I have to ask a question. Your group was such an iconic sound in the early days, and I think a lot of us got into you coming from the rock or R&B stage because of that sound you had with the group. Any thoughts of bringing it back, especially with Weil and Gottlieb and the original guys?
You know, I don't really, I mean, and you know, my perspective on everything is, of course, different from everyone else's because I'm sort of in the middle of all of it. To me, I don't really think, okay, well, there was this period, and then there was this period, and there was this band, and there was it. To me, it's all one thing. And I mean, anybody and everyone that I've ever played with, I would be happy to play with anytime. And any tune, anywhere along the way. I think there are people who go through their lives and they look back and they go, oh man, what was I thinking then? You know, I would never do that now. It's not that with me at all. I would be happy to play anything from anywhere with anybody who's ever done it. And at the same time, I don't really lay awake at night dreaming about that too much. I'm always thinking of like so what's the next chapter in the story, you know? I mean, in a way, this tour is the closest I've ever come to like a look back, in the sense that we're playing a lot of the older tunes. I mean, I would never rule anything out, but you know, I've always been very stubborn about doing exactly what I like to do, and you know, I would, you know, be happy to do a lot of different things, but I have so many ideas of things that I want to still try, that it's more like that. So, you know, maybe at some point along the way I would sort of, you know, I mean, do something like that, but it's pretty unlikely, I would say, you know, that I would say, okay, we're going to get the old guys together and we're going to do the 40th anniversary tour of the phase dance tour. You know, it's just kind of not my thing, you know. I know there are people that do that, and that's great, but I'm probably not one of them. I'm always kind of thinking ahead.
Next one.
Well, speaking of thinking ahead, as the old guy, new guy, where do you see jazz, the art form, say 20 years from now?
You know, I mean, of course, there's always a lot of discussion about style, genre, and you know, to me, this general community of musicians, of which you know, I'm really proud to be a part of, somehow it feels like the uber form to me. You know, if I think about the musicians that I hang with, you know, we could all kind of play, you know, we could go play with Katie Lang tomorrow and play with Cecil Taylor the next day. We're not thinking about, oh, this is, okay, now we're going to play this and now we're going to play. It's sort of, you know, if I think about Jack DeJohnette, or if I think about Herbie, it's like, it's not really about a way of playing as much as it's about a way of sort of just being. And the music becomes sort of this envelope that you put this way into. And I mean, I've always kind of felt like this area of music, it's almost like a symptom of something. It's more than a thing. It's like when I think about all the musicians that I love the most, and I was talking about this before, there's a certain kind of honesty, individuality, all these kind of, you know, sort of character issues that when I look around at the community, every guy that I can, and woman that I can think of that's in that community inhabits that zone. And that will always be there. And, you know, how it's called or how it's regarded is actually like completely superfluous to what it is. And the what it is part is always going to be there. And, you know, I mean, it's funny because I was talking with somebody about this too, you know, because I've been around for a long time. I mean, it's, you know, decades now. And I've been hip and not hip and hip and not hip. I've been everything like 3 or 4 times, and I'll probably be hip and not hip another couple times, you know, just like everybody is. But it really is incidental. I mean, that's perception. The thing about this music is that it's about it. And you know, honestly, I've always felt a little uncomfortable with the, you know, me part of it, because to me it has very little to do with me. I mean, you know, for instance, I've never put my picture on the cover of a record because I don't feel like it's about me, it's about it. And you know, if there was a way to do a gig and be invisible, man, I would love that. Because it is a thing that is way outside of the politics and the culture and everything else. I mean, of course, we're always going to talk about the politics and the culture because we're here and we're living day to day, and the politics and the culture affect everything we do too. And in fact, we have to report on that. We have to represent that in our individual ways as we move through time. But the meaning of it is something that I think is transcendent of any of the way anybody talks about it. And you know, even in my case, you know, there is an odd thing that I notice, which is, you know, when Bright Side's Life came out, you know, in '75, really, I mean, no exaggeration, nobody really gave a shit about that record when it came out. You know, it was sort of like, yeah, you know, I think it got like 1 or 2 stars and downbeat and whatever. And then, you know, as the years went by, people talked about it more and more and more. And, you know, now it seems to have like, you know, way more of a place than it did at the time in the discussion. And in fact, I think it was like listed in the Smithsonian or something as one of the 100 records of the 20th century or something like that. You know, and I'm like, wow, man, when that guy in Downbeat gave it 1 star, he didn't see it that way
Yes,
at
sir.
all. So just to finish that, so and I say this to younger guys a lot, just do your best. Play the music you love, because you don't really know what's gonna happen. You know, it's the thing of, you know, being yourself in the music. You know, it may take 50 years for people to get hip to that, but that's true. Everything else is just, you know, bouncing around off the walls. And, you know, that seems to have happened time and time again. I mean, I had an occasion a couple years ago where I had a trio with Christian McBride and Antonio Sanchez. We were playing a lot. And a bunch of promoters in Europe said, could you bring that trio with Larry Grenadier and Bill Stewart, which I had done about 15 years before that? And I was like, well, yeah, I could, but I got these guys. But we really like that one. And I was like, okay, you know, I mean, like I said, you know, before, I'm happy to play with anybody. But so I said to Christian and Antonio, I said, okay, guys, reserve 2027 for me, because we're going to be like really hip then.
I think we got time for one more question, it seems.
As somebody who, thank you for that lesson, by the way, as somebody who discovered you in Central America when I was living there in digital form, saw you for the first time living in Canada, to try to hunt you on records, because that's why we play your music on, some of us now on records. Now living here, I always saw you as a musician that was not necessarily from America, from the world. From the very first time, I associated you as a world musician. And as somebody who goes on this streaks of 100 shows at a time, what is the #1 lesson that you bring back home after playing for so many audiences and seeing so much?
That's a really interesting question. You know, it's true. We go out, like, you know, in the course of a normal year, we'll play usually 150. That's a pretty good number of concerts around the world. And yeah, people come to see us, but there's another thing, which is we get to see you guys. We see a group of 2,000 people or so every night. And today it's Japan, tomorrow it's Romania, the next day it's South Africa, the next day it's Morocco or whatever. I mean, and it's so interesting how in the course of a year, first of all, and another one of the great cliches, but it's true, everybody's the same everywhere, you know. And this kind of music, in particular because there is no language issue, the kinds of responses that this moment in the performance or that bass solo gets, it's kind of universal. And at the same time, yeah, I mean, different years are different. You guys are different, you know, and you can really see it. You can see, wow, man, people are really happy this year. People are worried this year, or people are, you know, people are feeling something this year. You know, it's kind of there, and that has been very interesting to observe.
Well, Pat Metheny, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we have to get Pat back to the Kennedy Center for his guitar sound check. But thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you tonight.
Great seeing you.
Okay.